What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you our final episode of the story of Divinity Original Sin 2. So, some caveats if you somehow landed on the final part very first. We are just covering the main plot. I will discuss the origin character stories, but towards the end of the video. Not quite the end of the video for this episode, like I have been doing, because I would like to address the origin characters before we get to the final fight of the final act. So we'll kind of take a small interjection towards the end there and talk about those at that time, which I feel makes more sense than doing it at the literal end after most of those stories will have concluded with the final boss fight. So, that out of the way, not covering a ton of the side quests. Arcs is a super fun act. I actually really enjoy Arcs a ton. Now, when the game launched, Arcs was not in such a great state compared to the rest of the game. However, the definitive edition and some patches fixed pretty much all of that. They really fleshed out Arcs, added a lot of meat to the bones. So it is a much better act than it used to be. It's actually my favorite one now. It used to be the first act until they fixed Arcs, and then Arcs is now a super fun place to be. But all that out of the way, at the end of the third episode, we had just gotten pulled out of the academy from the Nameless Isle. After Malady saved us from that, she brought us onto a ship as the Nameless Isle was destroyed in the Hall of Echoes, Our Lady Vengeance. This is where we will pick up. Malady has just taken us back. She is obviously very disappointed that Divinity was stolen from us at the end of Act 3, and now we need to track Dallas down and figure that out. Malady needs a little rest before she can pull us out of the Hall of Echoes, so you are invited to talk to your companions. You actually can't explore the ship in this particular part. You can go talk to your companions. They all have some fun things to say, but the main gist of this conversation is that if you've romanced any of them, or you have a high enough affinity with any of them, you can have some fun below decks before carrying on, and that's all we'll say about that. Now, when that scene wraps up, or you just choose to go to the front of the ship and carry on when you're ready, you can talk to Malady, who will then pull you out of the Hall of Echoes, but unfortunately, it doesn't quite go as planned.
After the briefest moment of respite, Malady brought the Godwoken to Arx to recover the divine powers Dallas had snatched away. But the half-demon secret was taking its toll on her.
Lucian! Fools! The bastard's going to ruin everything! Brace! Brace! Brace!
And you crash the Lady Vengeance just outside of Arx in the outskirts. Malady manages to pull off a pretty big feat. While the physical ship was destroyed in Arx, she does manage to keep part of it alive in the Hall of Echoes. So if you still need any of the services found on the Lady Vengeance, you can find them still. You just have to use the waypoints to access it versus like physically going to the ship. Now, this is the part where we learn how much of a toll it takes on Malady to pull us in and out of the Hall of Echoes like she has been doing, which has been alluded to throughout the game up to this point, but this is the part where we really notice because it takes a huge toll on her. So, here's the thing. If you messed up, so to speak, or made the conscious decision in Act 2 to not learn any source expanding powers from any of the Source Masters in Act 2, and Malady had to make deals with demons to find out the location of the Nameless Isle, then this particular jump to Arx will kill Malady if she had to do that in Act 2. So, this is, as far as I know, the only real instance where Malady dies. And if she dies, that affects Losa's origin story, because Malady plays a very important role in that a little farther on. But Malady dying most directly affects Losa's origin story. We know for a fact Malady's death right here is not canon. So a lot of the events in Divinity Original Sin 2 are questionable, but if Malady dies right here, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that is not canon. Because she is in Divinity Fallen Heroes, which was in production, which was scrapped. So unless they decide to completely scrap that game, which is technically just on halt right now, we know Malady survives this particular instance. We can talk to any survivors we have left. If you have Tarquin with you still, or Gareth, say, or maybe Almira even. Almira is in the Hall of Echoes, Lady Vengeance. She won't actually be in the physical world right here. But if any of those characters are still alive, you can absolutely talk to them and everything. None of them have a ton of important stuff to say right now. Mostly they're just like, go on and get out there, man. Find Divinity. When we leave the ship that has crashed area, we can find a cliff overlook, and we can see that the Kraken from the very start of the game has attacked the harbor of Arx and has actually destroyed the Lord Dread, Dallas's other ship, and the companion ship, shall we say, to the Lady Vengeance. Basically a male version of the same ship, known as the Lord Dread. Now, if we climb down the path here, we can get stopped by an elf who explains that Arx is under attack by Voidwoken, and that all sorts of crazy stuff is going on. But none of that's really important. So the outskirts has some merchants and stuff, if you need it, that you can buy some supplies from, but mostly you want to head towards the harbor and try to take care of this Kraken situation. So the Kraken. I hate the Kraken. God, I hate this fight. I hate it so very much. Like a lot of stuff, there are ways to cheese it, I'm well aware. With the party composition that I usually run, that I usually have the most fun with, this fight is a nightmare and I hate it. You'll fight the Kraken, there's like these 5 little tentacles which are what you actually have to kill. You cannot kill like the main body of the Kraken, you need to attack the little tentacles of the Kraken and the Kraken will like just go away. The problem is that the Kraken head will shoot these high damage water blasts every turn that more often than not freeze whoever happens to be hit by them, as well as summoning Voidwoken monsters who will also attack and freeze your characters. So basically, you need to really avoid the frozen status effect. What I actually recommend doing is, if you can, sneak up, teleport the main Voidwoken enemies, like the ones that aren't the Kraken and thus can move actually move around. Teleport those guys up and out of the way and dispose of them like one by one, as opposed to trying to fight them all at once, which will let you set up to attack the Kraken better. And from here, the Kraken will actually summon more every once in a while, so I find it best to kill half of the tentacles, retreat, come around the other side of the harbor so you can better tactically position your people to attack the other tentacles without it taking like 3 turns to move sides, and then kill those tentacles in a separate combat sequence, shall we say. Probably more information than you needed for a story video, but there you go. I hate that fight. That's how I personally deal with it. Now, once that's done, we can find our way up to the shattered remains of the Lord Dread. And the main thing we want to do here is actually talk to the Lord Dread, because like the Lady Vengeance, the Lord Dread is actually a livewood ship, which means it has a sentience attached to it. So if we talk to the Lord Dread, we can be like, hey man, where'd Dallas go? And he's like, well, I hate being a ship like the Lady Vengeance, so here, let me tell you. We find out that Dallas went into Arx, obviously, towards the Magister Barracks in town. Also, in addition to this, the Lord Dread mentions that Dallas and her sidekick Vredeman, who's still kicking around, are incredibly old. And you can be like, what? They're not that old. Dallas is like a young woman. And then the Lord Dread is like, nah, man, I'm an ancestor tree who was cut down and turned into a ship. I'm super old, but they're even older than I am. They're old. And you're like, all right, that's weird. Carrying on. Now we need to get into town, because that's really all there is to do on the outskirts as far as the main story goes. There is other stuff, but it's not important in the main story. In order to get into town, we need to cross a bridge that is actively under attack by Voidwoken. They are fighting some paladins on the bridge. This is a tough fight, but not nearly as bad as the Kraken, in my opinion. So on higher difficulties, I find it incredibly difficult to keep any of the paladins alive, but it does not really matter if they die here. None of the ones on the bridge are super important. So if they all die to the Voidwoken, don't worry about it too much. It doesn't make much of a difference. Now, the main boss in this fight is like this super roided out vampiric Voidwoken. This guy, if he hits you, will almost always heal to full health if he hits your vitality, because he has a ton of points in Necromancer. So because of that, you really need to lock I think Blood Fury is its name offhand. You need to lock it down where it's not taking any turns, because it will do massive damage and it will heal itself every time. So you really need to stun this thing into the ground until you can kill it. But I actually recommend killing it last, which is annoying, but try to take turns away from it while killing everything else, because it will summon in a ton of other Voidwoken in waves. So every time you think you're done, here comes some more. So it's an annoying fight to be sure, but again, in my opinion, not nearly as bad as the Kraken. After this happens, we will be greeted, shall we say, by another paladin who runs in to the area from the actual town portion of the city. So she'll run onto the bridge leading into Arx, and she'll be like, hey, thanks for killing all these Voidwoken, and more importantly, she will also explain that the Paladins are straight up at war with the Magisters, because Lord Kim, possibly because of you, if you completed a few side quests in Act 2, but regardless of whether or not you did that, this still happens. The Paladins are now at war with the Magisters because they found out about their Black Ring connections, because if you remember in Act 2 we found out the Magisters were using the Black Ring to accomplish goals, thanks to none other than Dallas and co, as we learned from Alexander before his untimely death, and then Dallas herself at the end of Act 3. Now, once we get in town after absorbing all that information, we went ahead basically due right to the Magister's barracks, and when we get there, we're going to come up on a execution. So Lord Kim, the commander of the Paladins, which we'll have learned his name more than likely by now, but if you haven't, Lord Kim, commander of the Paladins. He executes a Paladin for failing to take up arms against the Magisters, which might seem excessive in some ways. On both ends, you might on one hand be like, why didn't this Paladin want to fight the Magisters? Like, did she just think it was wrong or what? And then you might be like, seems like an extreme reaction of Kim to execute this Paladin for not killing people. But you can choose to intervene and help try to save the Paladin, or you can just watch it happen, be a bystander. Choose whatever you want. It doesn't make much of a difference. Now, after this, you want to talk to Lord Kim if you didn't, start a fight with him, and explain that you're looking for Dallas, the, leader of the Magisters, basically, at this point. He can be like, great, so are we. So he'll explain that, the Paladins found out again about these Black Ring connections and that they would also very much so like to know where Dallas is. We are invited to basically help the search, or you can convince Kim to help you search, however you want to word it. There is a hatch to the basement in the kitchen area of the Magister's barracks. Now there is a note on a body just outside in the courtyard of the Magister's barracks, and that note will kind of give some passcodes, and then you take those passcodes to the hatch in the basement and you put them in a dial thing through dialogue in the correct order, which, if I'm not mistaken, is literally just options 1, 2, 3, and 4 in that order. So put those in, the hatch will open, and then you can get down in there. But it's a pretty easy puzzle to solve. So once you get into the basement, you come up to like a small vault area. You can either go left and go into the door, or you can explore the little foyer area that you're in, solve a small puzzle, get access to a vault, and then head down a secret entrance into the next room. But the door to your left will also just take you down into that room. It will just change your positioning a little. However, and it's not really super important. It pretty much plays out the same, even if you take the back route. You'll just get access to the vault faster, because if you go to the room through the door, you can still find the entrance to the vault from the other side and not have to solve the puzzle. So either or. Once you get down into the next room here, we can find some Geists. Now, you're seeing Geists in my footage because I killed Raymond, as I mentioned, in Act 2. So, if you did not kill Raymond in Act 2 and he survived, you will find him in this basement, and it will be a much tougher fight because he has the room rigged with explosives. If you killed him, he is not here, neither are his white Magisters, and you just have to fight some Geists. It is so much easier if you kill him in Act 2, but if you didn't, you're going to have to deal with that fight now. And the other part of this is that if Raymond is still alive and he triggers those explosives, it burns up some notes and you won't get as much information. So you can do that if you want, but legit, you should totally kill Raymond in Act 2. It makes this so much easier. But I understand that not everybody will, so I felt the need to mention it. Once Raymond is either dead or the Geists are dead, whatever you chose to do, you can find some notes around the room if they weren't burnt up in the explosives, and you can find out quite a bit of information. That Vredeman, the guy who has been following Dallas around, is actually none other than Brachus Rex, who Tarquin, the necromancer we found aboard the Lady Vengeance, is in fact the guy who resurrected him because he was forced to by Dallas. Dallas found out he was a necromancer of some renown, used force to forcibly make him resurrect Brachus Rex. A conversation we can have with Tarquin, actually, if he's still alive and with us. He can explain kind of what happened. The other half of this is that we find out the White Magisters are in on the plan of Dallas's to get rid of Source. So as Dallas mentions in Act 3 when she attacks us, she thinks the world is better off without Divinity and she's trying to purge the rest of it. And this is where we find out that there is some pretty big distinctions between the White Magisters and the Magisters in the red suits. So the White Magisters are the leaders. They are in on the plan. They know what Dallas is actively trying to accomplish. The Red Magisters don't. And I think that this conversation in particular really adds some depth to the execution scene we saw upstairs, because when you put it in that light, the Paladin who was refusing to kill these Magisters was technically right. Like, there is no reason to be killing these Red Magisters. They honestly think they're just trying to protect the world. However, for the sake of roleplay, I have taken a very hard stance against Magisters because they imprisoned me at the start of the game, and I hate them. So, in addition to this, we lastly learn that Dallas is headed for the Tomb of Lucian, because, again, she's trying to purge the source, and in theory, Lucian the Divine's body is still full of the stuff, so she's trying to get into Lucian's tomb to get access to his corpse, so we're told. Now, this is where you will be interrupted by Lord Kim. Now that he's found, once he hears all that commotion and they come and find you, you can talk to Lord Kim. You can either tell him what you know, you can keep it to yourself, you can kind of have some conversation there back and forth. Regardless, the next place we want to go, because we find out from a variety of sources in town, that the keeper of Lucian's tomb is none other than Arhu, who is a recurring character from all the way back in Divine Divinity. So we should absolutely know who Arhu is if you've played the prior games. Otherwise, he is a demigod who is half cat, shall we say, to put it extremely lightly. There's way more to it than that, but basically he's half cat. But he has a room, shall we say, at the cathedral at the very north end of town. And that's basically where we should go next to try to find out how we can get into Lucian's tomb. Now, before we go on, there is one more really important thing that can happen, well, two, I guess, but one that we're going to focus on, thing that can happen in the Magister's Barracks. If you go to the prison part of the Magister's Barracks, you can find none other than Wendigo imprisoned. So it was possible to encounter her on the Nameless Isle, which I didn't mention because she's not part of the main plot, but you can encounter her there. And I'm mentioning it now because it is part of the main plot. This can be like literally the fourth time you've ran into her, and she's still alive as a skeleton in service to the God King, as we talked about last video. We can find Wendigo trapped and under interrogation by paladins, which is important because we can offer to take over those interrogations and talk to Wendigo. She begs to be freed. Now, this is a fun conversation because it is possible to convince her that you are trying to help her and that if you free her, she'll give you some information. You can do this in a way in which you'll free her and then she'll just give you the information totally without combat. It's also possible to free her and have her attack you immediately, and it is also possible to just walk away and not let her out, so whatever floats your boat. Plenty of options there. However, we're going to focus on the option where we successfully got her to give us information if we let her out. Because if you then let her out, she will then give you the information. Because at this point, because of her continued failed attempts to kill you, the God King has basically forsaken Wendigo, and she's real mad about it. So that kind of gives you some context. Now, if you free her, she will explain under this particular circumstance who the God King still has under his control in the city, who has sworn a covenant to the God King. Spoiler alert, it's important. Now, if you haven't figured it out already, you would be among good company. I actually didn't see this coming until it got revealed, and I was real mad about it. Unfortunately, it seems that Lord Linder Kim, the commander of the Paladins, has in fact sworn a covenant to the God King. Linder Kim is in fact the God King's favored son, shall we say. Not like literally his son, but as a turn of phrase. The other person in town who has sworn a covenant to the God King is none other than Isbiel, which is a dwarf serving in Queen Justinia's court, who is the queen of the dwarves. She is kind of important. You can actually go all the way to Lucian just following the main plot without ever talking to Isbiel, but she is part of some side quest and Beast's origin story, so just keep that in mind. We'll kind of swing back around to her in a little bit. But Wendigo will tell us early that these two are, in fact, sworn to the God King through a covenant. Wendigo from here will explain that she wants to break her own covenant with the God King. She is now going to go look for a sworn breaker, which, as again, we mentioned in Act 3, is the second one in the game, the one in Arcs. And a sworn breaker is the only thing that can break a covenant with the God King and allow a soul to pass on. With that out of the way, we can go seek out Arhu. And again, he has a room in the cathedral towards the north of town. Now, once we go to Arhu, we'll find out that his room is locked. There's a couple ways to get in here. You can pick the lock, you can barge in. My personal favorite way is to sneak in. If you go to the right, you can find a balcony, which you can use skills then to get to the other part of Arhu's balcony and then go in through his window through lockpicking. I personally find that to be the most fun, but there are multiple options to get into Lucian's room, or Arhu's room. Now, unfortunately, Arhu isn't here, and we don't have long to look around before Lord Linder Kim comes barging through the room. Now, at this point, we may or may not know that he's aligned with the God King. We don't have to point it out, and even if you do point it out, he's like, nah, man, not at all, and just kind of brushes it under the rug. So wouldn't really bother with it at this point in time. But Arhu's missing, and if you are quick enough in your search, or whether or not you found out by other means, because you can find out that Arhu had a meeting at Linder Kim's mansion, and that's the last time he was seen. So regardless of whether or not you know about his God King affiliation, the next place we're going to is Linder Kim's mansion to investigate. Now, once we get to Kim's mansion, we basically want to look around. We can talk to people who can talk about seeing a white cat around, that kind of thing, but there's also a side quest with a woman named Kat the Appraiser, who implies that Lord Kim has a secret vault. Now, I mentioned this side quest because this is probably the easiest way to find the vault, but you can also just stumble upon it. You can also learn about it from other sources. There's a couple other places you can learn about the vault, such as the kids in the sewer, because there is a small group of vagrant children living in the sewer that you can run into. And in fact, you will have needed to run into them. So before we go any further, I want to mention that in the sewers, again, you can find a small little thieves guild of kids. Now, if you go in there, you talk to them without triggering a fight. So if you trigger a fight, you got to fight a bunch of trolls, because the children have troll guards, which is awesome. You either have to kill them and then, kind of just look around the room, or talk to the children if you've successfully persuaded your way in the door. You can notice that there is a big painting in the little kids thief guild trove area, and it is a very impressive painting. Now, if you haven't been to Kim's vault yet, you can be like, hey, where'd you get this? And the kids, if you pass some persuasion, be like, oh yeah, we robbed Kim's vault and stole some stuff. So that's another way you can learn about the vault. This is important later because, spoiler alert, you just need that painting. And I recommend you get it before you do this next part with Kim's vault, because it'll make this one trip instead of two. You need that painting in order to access the inner part of Kim's vault. Circling back around, in Kim's mansion, if you go to the gardens, and the kids will have told you this as well, by the way, they'll mention how to get into the vault. But again, you can also find it on your own. There is actually a lever in Kim's gardens on the backside of his mansion that you can find. And what it does is lowers the water level in his little pond, which gives access to a secret hatch, which actually leads down into the vault. You can either picklock your way into the hatch, or you can actually find a key to it in Kim's mansion as well. And this will drop you down into the first part of Kim's mansion. Now, you're immediately going to notice some giant Lucian statues stomping around. So these guys are annoying. Even if you put them down, they will come back to life in 3 turns. However, if you use source vampirism on them while they're deactivated, it will permanently destroy them. But getting them deactivated is the problem. These guys are pretty tough. Try to single them out if you want to fight them. However, you can also just sneak by them and ignore them entirely, which I recommend doing because they're not, really necessary at this point. On the back side of Kim's mansion, whether we fought or snuck our way back there, we will find a painting that is missing the middle painting. As you've probably put together by now, we need the painting from the kids in the sewer to put in the middle to unlock it, which will then unlock a secret door to a small inner sanctum of the vault. Once we step into this inner vault, we can find a bunch of bookshelves. One will have a mysterious book, and if we pull that book, it unlocks yet another secret door into a deeper part of the vault. If we step in here, we will come to this really crazy looking room with an altar to the God King. If we have not found out that Lord Linder Kim is aligned with the God King already, this is where we're going to find out about it if we just missed that fact or we didn't talk to Wendigo. Now, if we freed Wendigo, she is in this room because she basically is on her last legs as far as health goes, and she can't quite get to the Swornbreaker, which is in the next room. Now, once we get close to the God King statue, the God King will interrupt and have a conversation with us and be like, hey man, turn back before you die. So obviously we're going to ignore his very stern warnings, and we're going to walk up to his altar. Now, what we need to do here is read the plaque on the altar, which will say something about the weight of responsibility. And what you may or may not have noticed in the prior room to this, the first inner vault area, there's a big painting on the wall. If you go back to that painting, its name is literally Responsibility. So obviously pick that up, go back down to the vault, put the painting on the altar, and the weight of that will activate the altar, which will slide out of the way, revealing another hatch to the final room of Kim's vault, where Arhu is being tormented by spirits. In addition to this, there is a Swornbreaker in the hands of the statue just beyond Arhu, so that's where the Swornbreaker is, by the way. Arhu is being kept in place, shall we say, by like some pain ghosts. So ghosts are like tormenting him that you need spirit vision to see, and you need to source vampirism them away to free Arhu, which blacks Arhu out so he's not a ton of help. He kind of passes out from the pain of this endeavor, and when that happens, and once Arhu is free, you will be attacked by some Black Ring members. And then on the second turn, Lord Linderkim will enter the room. Now, if Wendigo got to the vault because you freed her, he will have Wendigo as a hostage in front of him because if you remember, she was in the previous room. Now, unfortunately, this is the part where that storyline loses a little bit of luster because if you got this far, you can't give her the Swornbreaker anymore because Linderkim is about to execute her in front of you. So you can't do anything even if you got this far to get that Swornbreaker to give to her. The only way you can free Wendigo from her covenant at this point is if you actually didn't free her and thus didn't have the information about Lord Linderkim up to this point. So just kind of an interesting little play on things. Now, obviously, this is where we're going to have to fight Lord Linderkim. This is the single most annoying fight in the game to me. I don't like the Kraken fight. I hate this fight, which is why I cheese it every single time, even on higher difficulties. God, I hate this fight so much. So, Lord Linderkim is immune to Death Fog because he's sworn to the God King, which means he's technically undead, which means Death Fog won't affect him. However, his 4 adds in the room, who are amazingly strategically emplaced, are not. So if you've managed to steal some Death Fog, there's actually a ton of it in the sewers of Arks. So if you go down there, get some of those barrels of Death Fog, and then go do this fight, you can actually place the barrels of Death Fog where the spawns spawn in at, and then, break them so the Death Fog spreads. And then the 4 adds, as soon as they step into battle, will actually die immediately from the Death Fog, and then you'll just have to fight Lord Linderkim, which is leaps and bounds easier than dealing with his annoying people. Because again, this fight is really annoying, and Linderkim is probably the strongest melee character in the game. Like, even some of the in-game fight bosses do not hit as hard as this dude does in melee. It's ridiculous. Now, once that fight is out of the way, we can talk to either Arhu himself or his spirit if he died in the fight. It is super easy for Arhu to die in this fight. It is annoying. In fact, most guides tell you to straight up personally teleport Arhu out of the way so he doesn't get hit by a bunch of the AoEs that are going to be flying around and is thus less likely to die. But Arhu is incredibly likely to die in this fight, especially on higher difficulty. Now we either want to talk to, again, either Arhu himself or his spirit, and he will explain that everyone keeps trying to get into Lucian's tomb, and that Arhu was told by Lucian to seal his body away, that none may see it in repose, basically. He doesn't know why. One doesn't question a divine, as he puts it. So Arhu had this elaborate path to Lucian's tomb constructed, which I've been a little vague about up to this point. I'm aware some of you might have been asking, hey, why don't you just go straight for Lucian's tomb? Why do we have to do all this talking to Arhu nonsense? Well, this is why. So in order to get to Lucian's tomb, the first thing you have to do is traverse what's called the Path of Blood. Now, the Path of Blood is a pilgrimage, technically, of sorts, where basically you walk into the entrance to Lucian's tomb. A statue there will ask you some questions about whether you've lied, murdered, stolen, that kind of thing. And if you lie to this statue about literally any of it, it kills you outright. In fact, when you walk up to it for the first time, you'll see somebody run in there and get murdered by the statue. Now, Arhu will explain that obviously everyone, especially if you've made it this far in the game, you've killed a lot of people, so you're never going to pass that test. Arhu will explain that there is a failsafe, because he knows the person who worked on it and made this Path of Blood, which is the toy maker in town. The toy maker has an amulet that can help you bypass the main protections of the Path of Blood. Now that we're talking about it, though, there is a second way past the Path of Blood. So if you go to Sergeant Zrilla on the Lady Vengeance, who is the person who hires mercenaries for you if you either lost or got rid of an origin character off of your team and want to replace them with, someone, you can go to Sergeant Zrilla, who will give you a generic mercenary that you can then customize into whoever you want. If you go to Sergeant Zrilla in Act 4 here in Arks, before, once you've gotten into town, you can hire a mercenary from her and then immediately take that mercenary to the path of blood, and then that person can honestly answer the questions that they haven't lied, murdered, stolen, or anything, because technically, under your control, they haven't, which will successfully pass the path of blood the old-fashioned way, shall we say. So that is technically a workaround if you are absolutely having an impossible time with the rest of this, which is possible. There's a huge difficulty spike in arcs, especially on Tactician and R mode. One more thing, Arhu also explains that there is a room on the way to Lucian's tomb known as the Death Room, and basically what you need to do is there will be a bunch of levers everywhere, and you need to pull the levers, which are named, to where the first letter of each named lever spells out power. He also tells you this: you can learn this other places. This is not the only way to get this information, but, we're saving him, and he gives us this information at the same time as telling us how to get past the Path of Blood, so I think it's pretty useful. Now from here, we want to go talk to the toy maker, who's just off the town square. From talking to the toy maker, he explains that, he made the Path of Blood, and in order to get by it, you need a necklace that is brimming with source, and a scroll with a magic spell on it, basically. So there's a switch near the statue that questions you. You can put the amulet that is filled with source in a switch nearby, and then read the scroll, and a hatch will open up without you having to pass the Path of Blood's trial. It's also interesting to note that the toy maker didn't get sent to Fort Joy despite being a sorcerer, specifically because Arhu protected him and basically told the Magisters no. So that tells you right there that Arhu has a ton of authority, even when they're rounding up sorcerers. Once we get the amulet filled up with source, which is the first thing the toy maker gives us, so basically you just have to put the amulet on and then source vampire a bunch of stuff, consume some source orbs, basically just give the amulet 5 charges of source points, which you do by doing anything that'll gain you source while wearing the amulet, and then take it back to the toy maker when he'll be like, oh great, now you have the amulet all charged up. If you go upstairs, here's a password to a chest where you can get the magic spell that you need. Now when you head upstairs, to get that magic spell, you'll be attacked by the toy maker's toy puppets that he has everywhere, because they will be possessed by the God King and used to attack you. These guys aren't super hard, they don't have a lot of health, but what they do have is a ton of very high-powered magics. So they will use a ton of high-powered source abilities against you, which is annoying. So they do a ton of damage, but the puppets themselves don't have a ton of health, which is helpful. And once we kill all these puppets, we can go to the toy maker's special chest, write down the password that he gave us on a piece of parchment, which unlocks it and then gives us the spell we need to finally get past the Path of Blood. Now that we have all this, we're going to go to the Path of Blood. It's just in the cathedral. It's very easy to enter. You just literally enter a door. There's literally a Path of Blood leading to it. It's pretty easy to find. You'll enter the door where the Path of Blood takes place, and, again, instead of engaging with the statue in the middle of the room, you'll find a switch to the side. You'll put the charged amulet in that switch, then you'll read the spell, then this hatch opens, and you can go down further into Lucian's tomb. Once you hop down there, you can find that obviously people have beaten you here. You can find skeletons and things like that around, so people have gotten this far before. But there's also a big tomb, like a big sarcophagus in the middle of the room, and if you click on that, there's nothing actually in there, just as a quick aside. This is the part where I want to mention Karen. So Karen, K-A-R-O-N, not the other kind of Karen. Karen is the first Godwoken that was found after Lucian died, supposedly. Karen can actually be found in the Magister Barracks sewers. If you go deep down past the prison area in the Magister's Barracks, you can find Karen locked up in a cage as a child, so he's putting on an illusion to appear as a child. He's trapped in a cage by spirits down in the sewers down there. And the spirits will explain to you that Karen, despite using the illusion to look like a child and pull at your heartstrings, was the first Godwoken the Seekers ever found and tried to get to ascend to divinity in Lucian's place after he died. If we talk to Karen, we can find out that basically he was driven insane because after all this training and stuff that he received from the Seekers, he did grow very powerful, but he started to then receive visions of Lucian that explained that he just needed to kill all these people. So he basically turned into a murderous psychopath and started killing Seekers, and then the Seekers locked him up. Now, Karen is more aptly referred to as the Mistake. Like, that's his big name. Karen did not exist in the original version of the game. Karen was added with the revamp to arcs that I mentioned earlier, and it was just, again, to kind of add some meat to the bones of this next part. Karen explains that he needs to get down to Lucian's body so he can serve Lucian some more, and, he's going to try to kill you. You need to dispose of him. Now, even if you found Karen and then left him in his cage, he will still attack you right here. If you didn't find him at all, he'll still attack you right here. He's just going to attack you right here. But that said, it is possible to kill him in the sewers before you get here as well. So keep in mind, that is an option. Now, from here, we have a very annoying puzzle. So if we go to the north part of this room here, we're going to find a puzzle. Now, if this is your first time running into this, it's going to take some figuring out. Below you are 2 blessed substances in big bowls, a grid of sorts with a bunch of pipe-looking things leading through like blocks that you can then turn. There are 3 empty bowls on the far end of the puzzle. And the middle bowl nearest you is also empty. Now, what you need to do is take the blessed substances from your side of the puzzle and get them to reach their appropriate bowl on the far end, which you can tell which one goes where, because on the far end of the puzzle, in addition to the empty bowls, just behind those empty bowls are another set of empty bowls full of blessed substances that you can actually tell what they are. Now, first thing you need to do here is there is an empty bowl on your side that obviously you need to fill with something, otherwise you can't travel it to the third bowl on the other side. What you need to do here is there's a grate near you. You need to somehow make blood go into that grate, be it either hitting one of your companions or using the skill Blood Rain, for instance, something like that. Blood needs to find its way onto this grate, because if you put blood into this grate, it will then fill up the empty bowl nearest you. Now from there you need to cast Bless on the blood that goes into the grate, but not just yet. We'll get to that, because if we cast it right now, by the time we get the blood into the bowl at the end of the puzzle, the bless effect will have worn off and it will just be back to regular blood. So we need to solve the puzzle and then lastly bless the bowl so the blessed substance on the end matches the rhythm, shall we say, towards the end. Now I know that sounds confusing and I probably didn't explain it super well, so as you will have noticed, there is a big picture of how this puzzle is supposed to look when you are done. All the paths you're supposed to take, how you're supposed to arrange the bowls. This is how it's done. I figure it's easier than wasting everybody's time with how to actually do it. Now, once we get done with this puzzle, we come to a big causeway where we have to pass a bridge into a door. The door will be like, you sure you want to do this? This is only death after this. So this is our marker into the death room that I mentioned earlier. Once we step into this room, puppets that we saw earlier start going off like crazy. And they'll run around and they will pull all sorts of levers throughout this room. These levers will do all sorts of crazy stuff. Teleport people, activate traps, deactivate traps, cause fireballs to rain from the sky. All sorts of crazy stuff. What you need to do is, like I mentioned earlier, you need to find the levers, you can see this by mousing over them, and spell out the word power with the first letter of the names of the levers. They're kind of all over the room, just mouse over them, you can see their names. You can do this literally without moving a single character. Just mouse over the levers, make sure you got the right one. Power. It's like empathy, righteousness for E and R. Wisdom, I think, is the W. So stuff like that. You just spell out power with the levers, and then that'll deactivate the force field and the puppets and the traps and everything. And then that'll open the final door. From here, we can head down the stairs past the port, like the door that we just opened, the source barrier that we just took down. Probably a better way to put it. We can then go down these stairs on the far end of this, and this is where the final part of the game commences. So we're going to take a quick interjection to wrap up the origin characters' stories before we get to the final fight. We're going to skip Sabile because Sabile's story ended on the Nameless Isle in the act just prior to this. But everyone else's pretty well ends in Act 4. So let's start with the Red Prince. The Red Prince in Act 3 learned that Sadia was supposed to be in Ark somewhere, which is the Red Princess who he maybe did or didn't mate with at Act 2. We need to go to Arks to find Sadia. Now, we can find either from dialogue or actually just going there that Sadia was last seen at the Lizard Consulate. The Lizard Consulate is just north of Lord Linderkim's mansion. Now when you get there, it's destroyed and you need to find your way to the garden. Now once you get to the garden area, if you use your spirit vision skill, if you don't have it active, you will find out that there is a large portal over the water area here in the Lizard Consulate, and that you need to go through it because you're very certain that Sadia is hiding in it. So once we go through this portal, we're deposited into an arena of sorts, and as soon as you move, you'll be attacked by a dream version of Malady, Alexander, and Wendigo. Now you don't have to engage with this fight at all if you know what you're doing. You're in this little Colosseum-like area, and there are black mirrors everywhere. What you need to do is kill the black mirrors, which will then, once they're all destroyed, open up a door to the north that you can then go through. If you do not destroy the black mirrors before you engage Alexander, Malady, and Wendigo, if they die, they will just pop right back up through one of the mirrors. So it's very annoying. Even if you want to kill all of them instead of just dipping out through the door early, you still need to kill all the mirrors before you try to fight them. Now once that's done, we can go through that door. We can find Brahmos on the other side of it, the lizard dreamer from Act 2. And Brahmos will be like, oh, thank God you're here. Sadia is waiting just past this door. But he'll only tell the Red Prince this, obviously. And he'll give the Red Prince a key to this door, which will then lead us to Sadia. So we go through it. We're in a little desert area. And we can go talk to Sadia, who is right down here. Now from here, the Red Prince can make a few different decisions. If the Red Prince and Sadia mated up to this point, Sadia will have an egg with her, and she'll explain that it will hatch into a dragon per the prophecy. I've already expressed my distaste about this prophecy. I won't go into it again here. She'll explain that, again, the egg will hatch into a red dragon per this prophecy if the Red Prince uses his flame breath on it, which will then hatch the egg. You can technically hatch the egg with any other lizard's fire breath, but Sadia will attack you if you do this. You need to do it with the Red Prince if you want to go that route. Now the catch is as I mentioned in Act 2, Sadia is actually sworn to the God King as well. So if you want to break that, you need the Sworn Breaker. She is honestly the person I recommend giving it to outside of Almira, because Wendigo, I don't think really deserves it, as she has tried to kill you multiple times. So honestly, even if you do save Wendigo, I don't recommend giving it to her anyway, personally. But that said, Sadia also needs one. Now this is where we start running into a problem, because we have 3 people who could use a Sworn Breaker, and there's only 2 in the game. So you need to make a decision somewhere. There's potentially 4 in the game, but we'll get into that in a minute. You can either save Sadia with the Sworn Breaker and hatch the Red Prince's dragon babies, which is the best ending for the Red Prince. Technically, that's the good ending, if you will. You can hatch the eggs and then not manage to free Sadia, which will obviously not be the greatest ending, but it's better than nothing. The Red Prince can refuse to mate with her all around and never have gotten the egg to begin with, and then you can choose to help or kill Sadia. You can also kill Sadia outright, never mate with her, which is considered probably like a not great ending, but like also not a terrible ending either, because she did swear herself to the God King. Make your decision, and that is pretty much the Red Prince's outcome. So kind of just whatever you want to do there. Now moving on from there, we are going to talk about Losa. So Losa has probably the coolest origin story ending, and I have to talk about it in some terms because her origin story wraps up with the last boss. So does Ifan's and Feigns. But Losa's, up to this point, we found out that she was being, of course, possessed by the demon Andromalik, who is actually Dr. Deva, who resides in the city of Arx, which is where we are. Now, after a few key events in Arx, we can get an invitation from Dr. Deva to come see him. Malady will actually pop up right outside the doctor's mansion, or Andromalik's mansion, and she'll explain that she found a way to weaken him, provided you've done Losa's story up to this point anyway. Now, if you go with Malady, you'll find these candles in a little pocket realm that Andromalik has made for himself, and these candles represent souls. And as you snuff them out, it kills the person in the real world, but it also decreases Andromalik's power. And the big reveal is that there are thousands of them. There are tons of these candles. Andromalik has been doing this a very long time. But you can choose to snuff out all the candles, weakening Andromalik, which will save you a ton of hassle in the fight with him if you choose to fight him. That said, you can also choose not to, and you can still kill Andromalik, but the fight is much harder, so make your decision. Now, once you're done with this, either way, you'll leave the area with Malady. Now, the really cool part here this has real implications for the broader city of Arx, because if you do this and you snuff out all the candles, you can straight up find corpses just in the street now, because these people had made deals with Andromalik, and because you wiped out his candles, which was that person's soul, you killed them, and you can just find their bodies throughout Arx. It's awesome. Now that said, from here, you go to the door to Dr. Deva's place. You can go in that way. If you're Losa, it'll just open right up for you. There's a bunch of nurses here, which are actually corrupted, possessed elves that will help the doctor, so I recommend you kill them. And then you can go talk to Andromalik yourself. Now, if Jahan is still with you, if you chose to take him on to the Lady Vengeance after his part in Act 2, which is an option, Jahan will have already tried to attack Andromalik, and he is trapped in the basement. Now, there is a side quest in Act 2, which has a bunch of implications about how Dr. Deva's getting like void-woken fish or something delivered to him in Arx. And there is a very convoluted method to like get teleported into the doctor's basement rather than going to fight him directly through his front door, which is convoluted. I've never personally got that to work right, to be honest with you. So it's usually easier to just go through the front door. But once you get to Dr. Deva / Andromalik, you can have a conversation with him, where it turns out that Andromalik doesn't want to kill Losa, which is why he hasn't just fully taken her over at this point. What Andromalik would like to do is share divinity with her. He possessed her as a Godwoken because he wants her to claim divinity, thus making himself a sort of demon divine, shall we say. And you can agree to this. You can absolutely be like, yeah, man, all right, totally, let's do it. That is an option. You can do that. Now, alternatively, what most people are going to do, and what, any good person would do, is you'll kill Andromalik, which again is much easier if you did the part with Malady where you weakened him. In fact, you can kill him in one turn. Now, once you defeat Andromalik, if you choose to actually fight him, it will free Losa from his control. It does seem there's like a sliver of him left in her, as you can talk about through dialogue options, but Losa will sing you a song, and will like literally sing you a song that the game will play audio for, which is really cool. And there you go. You freed Losa of her demon. Unless, of course, you chose to side with Andromalik and help him claim divinity through you, which again, you can do, but we'll get into that in a bit. That brings us to Beast. Beast, as we know, was looking for Queen Justinia in Arx after he found out about her plot to bring a bunch of death fog into the city of Arx through the events of Acts 2 and 3. Lohar, at the end of Act 2, will have given Beast an invitation to a wedding for a prominent dwarf in Arx. We can go to that wedding, find out that it was actually attacked by Voidwoken during the ceremony, and through some investigation, we can find our way into the sewers beneath town, just underneath the dwarven wedding area, and we can find our way to Queen Justinia and Isbiel, who is holed up in the sewers under Arx. And from this conversation, we learn that Isbiel has been basically kind of manipulating Queen Justinia into constantly fighting these rebels. Queen Justinia and Isbiel have come up with a plan to death fog the entire city of Arx. So, here's the thing. You can do this if you want to. There's a fight with Queen Justinia and Isbiel, of course, but you only fight Isbiel. Queen Justinia comes in after it, which I'll get to in a second. But when you first find them, you'll have a conversation with them. If you choose to go along with it, they'll actually paralyze you and knock you out and everything, and then you'll come to in this pit where a fight will ensue, and you'll have to fight Isbiel and her minions, which are all around. Again, they're immune to death fog, so you can't actually break the death fog barrels that are laying around everywhere to help kill them, because they're all undead, and it's not going to affect Isbiel at least. So that's a tough fight, especially on harder difficulties, but should you win, you can then go up to the big death fog machine that they planned on using to deliver the death fog to the city of Arx, and you can choose to either unleash it on Arx or pump it out to the sea where it can't hurt anyone. You can actually do this. You can pump death fog up to the city of Arx, which will kill almost everyone in the city. Obviously, there's a few exceptions, as some people are undead, but you can do it if you want. You can kill almost everyone in Arx, which is hilarious that it's an option, but it's also not very useful. The smart thing to do, obviously, would be to pump it out to sea. Now, once that's done, you can make your way to a side door where you'll encounter Justinia, because she was knocked out too or something, and she'll come barreling through the door. And if you have Beast with you, you can choose to save or spare her, and Beast will have some extra dialogue options along with that as far as forgiving her because she was clearly being manipulated by Isbiel. And then she can reconcile with Beast, or you can choose to kill Queen Justinia for her, trying to death fog the entire city of Arx. You can see it both ways on that one. And that is it for Beast. Now that brings us to Feign and Ifan. So both of their origin stories actually kind of wrap up in the end fight, but just to recap them real quick before we go into the end fight, Feign has found out up to this point, as he's recovered his memories and stuff, that it was none other than him that discovered the Veil of Source that allowed the gods to usurp power from the God King and turn themselves into gods. Feign discovered the Veil of Source that enabled that. We also find out that the Voidwoken are actually Eternals that have sided with the Void in an effort to try to get back into Rivellon and reclaim the Source that pushed them out, because every Source user that dies helps them get back into the world, which is why they show up wherever Source is used. And that Feign, if you chose to, in Act 3, could actually swear a covenant to the God King, becoming the potential fourth person to need a Swornbreaker, which again, you can find one in Arx. The rest of his story wraps up in the end fight, so I'll cover it when we get there in just a minute. Same thing with Ifan. He learns that, he was a lone wolf. The lone wolves as an organization were used to hunt down Godwoken, which it finds out that, the Black Ring and stuff were the ones paying them to do that. He finds out that Lucian was killing Godwoken in the Academy, which shakes him up real bad because Ifan used to be a member of the Divine Order, which were the Paladins and everything. Ifan personally delivered the Death Fog to all the elves about 9 years prior to this, and he's been real shaken up about it since then. And we'll get into how his story wraps up in the end fight as well. Now that brings us back to the final fight of the game. So, as we step into the final chamber, we'll be greeted by all the characters on the Lady of Vengeance who have made it here alive. So, if Gareth has died, if Almira didn't make it or you never talked to her, if you killed Tarquin, if Malady died, then they won't be here. But if they made it, they will come into this room and they will begin a prayer for you, which is important because for every one of them that made it, up to 3, their prayers for you in this moment trying to claim divinity will actually reduce the source cost of source abilities by 1 point. And because they are only at a maximum 3 points cost, you only need 3 of them to make it here to reduce that cost to 0, which will let you use your source abilities for just action points, which will really help out in this fight, especially if you make it the hard way. So, this is a pretty small room. As we come around down the stairs, we run into none other than Lucian the Divine. He is not dead. He has not been dead. He faked his death. We come into this conversation like, holy shit, you're Lucian the Divine. What is going on here? Dallas is also here. Vredeman, who is actually Brachus Rex, is here, which we could have found out, as well as some white magisters hanging around. This is an incredible conversation with Lucian where we get all the big plot reveals. To cover the origin characters real quick, it turns out that Dallas is not Dallas. She is Fein's daughter. So she's actually an Eternal. The person who discovered where Feign and his family were imprisoned for what they did, which was, what Feign did, which was discovering the source and everything. When Feign was punished for that, they were basically imprisoned in a tomb. The person who opened that tomb was the actual Dallas, the actual Magister Dallas. The daughter of Feign wound up killing this woman and taking her place through Fein's face ripper mask that lets them, transform into human beings that we would have found out about throughout the game. Feign has this big coming to Jesus moment, so to speak, with the Divine, Lucian, and his daughter, and he needs to basically accept that for what it is. And then he gets an extra ending option that is just for Feign that we'll talk about when I get to the ending sections here in just a minute. But that's kind of the bulk of his origin story right there. And basically he's conflicted because, he's a member of the Eternals, who are the people sentenced to the Voidwoken. So does he help them come back and take their rightful place in the world? Does he feel bad for causing his daughter so much pain? His wife apparently died in this somewhere or another. And basically he has to come to grips with, does he leave that behind him or does he help the Eternals re-enter the world? That's one of the special endings for him that we'll get to here in a minute. Because up to this point, he might actually still be sworn to the God King if you didn't use a Swornbreaker, which makes that ending the default. And then Ifan, confronted with the fact that Lucian is still alive and didn't even die, which he faked his death, Ifan basically has to make the decision of, can he forgive Lucian for the things Lucian has done? Because Lucian has caused the deaths of so many people. Can Ifan let that go or not? That's probably the crux of Ifan's personal story, in my opinion. Can he forgive Lucian for what Lucian was trying to do and the horrible things that Lucian did in pursuit of that? And if you're playing Ifan, you get to make that decision. Now, that's how those wrap up. That's it for Ifan. He doesn't get any special endings. We will cover Feign's special ending here in just a minute. So, as I just mentioned, you can talk to Lucian. He's like, yeah, I'm still alive, as it turns out. Through this conversation, we learn a lot of stuff. But basically, Lucian used the events in 1233 when he was fighting Damien and attempting to banish him to Nemesis. He had to death fog all these elves. In doing so, Lucian used that to fake his own death, where he decided to go into a tenebrium-laced tomb that he had already had built by Arhu and the Toymaker. Tenebrium blocks source. Tenebrium is like what lead is to radioactivity. It just blocks it from moving. So no one can detect source on the other side of a tenebrium barrier. Tenebrium is like a special type of metal. Lucian had this entire tomb set up, laced with tenebrium, so despite being alive, even the gods would think he was dead because even they can't see past tenebrium, and this tomb was lined with it. Now, from here, Lucian decided to start siphoning source from the gods, which weakened them, which allowed the void to come in. However, that's not the beginning of it. Lucian made a mistake when he ordered the elves death fogged. You see, as I mentioned earlier, and as you will have found out throughout the game, the gods feed on people's source. People are born, they gather source throughout their life, they die, the gods feed on that source. It's a ever-turning system. In death fogging all of those elves, that was the first crack, because it weakened Tyr Sindelius to the point that the Void was able to get a foothold because of it. And then they started pouring through to attack Source users, and that's when people using Source started attracting the Void. Lucian made this even worse when he shirked his duties and started siphoning Source off. So, why is he doing this, and why is Dallas helping him? Well, Dallas is helping him because she truly believes that it's what's for the best. Dallas, being Feign's daughter, got a first front row seat to what Source does for these gods. So she believes in Lucian's mission, which is to purge Source from the world entirely. Lucian is siphoning all this Source, gathering it all together, because he wants to purge it from the world, which will put a permanent end to the Voidwoken by sealing the Veil of Source that Feign discovered, which will then, of course, permanently lock the Voidwoken out because they will no longer have a way in. And basically, Lucian plans on, after this happening, of basically staying in power as a false divine. He'll have no real power, but people won't know that, and he'll be able to use his position to basically bring the world to heal through peace, finally. The thing is, the last bit of source they need is from none other than you. So they ask you whether or not you want to surrender your source peacefully, or do you want to fight for it? Because if you say no, they're going to fight you. You can choose to fight Lucian over this right here, right now. You can be like, no, man, I'm not giving up my source. I came here to become divine. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to take that. Screw the greater good of the world. Let's fight over this. You can do that, but I don't recommend it. Because if you do that, you are actually going to have to fight everybody in the room. And then it turns out that Vredeman goes full Brachus Rex on everybody and enters a phase 2 of the fight, where then you'll have to fight everyone. Lucian, Dallas, Brachus, and his minions. It's a nightmare. Now, luckily, you only really need to focus on Brachus to end that fight, so if you go that route, that's my recommendation to you. Focus on Brachus. You cannot hope to kill all of these people. It's a pain. Just focus on Brachus. If you do that, it'll make your life so much easier. That said, the easier thing to do is agree to give up your source. Now you might be thinking, why would you do that? Well, besides the inherent good that would actually do the world, there's also a more tactical reason behind it. Regardless of whether or not you choose to give up your source, Brachus then goes full crazy and attacks anyway, entering phase 2 by completely skipping phase 1. In addition to skipping phase 1, Lucian, Dallas, and the White Magisters that are there will be on your side fighting Brachus Rex, which makes him super easy to kill even on higher difficulties. But you might be thinking, well, I still don't want to give up my source. Why would I choose that option? Well, fun fact, this dialogue with Lucian is not choosing any of the endings. It's literally just choosing the conditions of the ending fight. After you kill Brachus, even if you skip to phase 2 by saying you'll surrender your source, and then fighting Brachus Rex, because he jumps out and is like, we're going to fight anyway, because I'm going to become divine. Now, once that happens and you defeat Brachus Rex, then conversations will happen where you will then actually pick the ending, which is what we're about to get into. So regardless of your dialogue options with Lucian just now, that does not pick the ending. The conversation after the fight picks the ending. Now, there are actually a ton of endings. We are going to cover the main endings, and there are also all sorts of little slides that talk about areas of the game you were in. Did you kill Gratiana on Act 1 by destroying her soul jar? Did you save Tarquin or kill him? Is Gareth still alive? What is he doing? All sorts of stuff like that. That really depends on whether or not people came with you or you made it, but it'll kind of discuss how things played out for those people. I'm not really going to cover any of those. We're just sticking with the main plot ending parts. Now, first and foremost, and probably the most straightforward, you can choose to become divine. So once this fight wraps up, it is implied that Lucian is out of commission somehow or another, and you can choose what to do yourself. So you can choose to take the Atiran that had gathered all that source on the Nameless Isle and from all these other people, and you can use that to become the divine. You can do that. You can also pass on divinity, in which case your companions will usually pass on divinity as well. If you choose to do that, if none of your player characters choose to take up the mantle of divinity or do anything with it, the God King will actually swoop in and claim it for himself, which is obviously a pretty bad ending and involves all mortal races basically being wiped out and the world replaced with Eternals. So that's an option. There are the two non-becoming the divine options, which are, of course, sharing source with the entire world, with the idea being that if you give that much source to everyone throughout the world, then, if everyone's divine, no one's divine kind of thing. And then the other option is to follow through with Lucian's plan to purge Source from the world and seal the veil of Source that caused all these problems in the first place, thus locking the Eternals out basically forever. There is also the deal you could have made with Andromalique. You don't need to be Losa to do this, by the way. Losa has her origin character kind of rooted in it, but if any of your characters went and made a deal with Andromalique, he will come help you in the final battle, and he'll kill Lucian outright, and then you'll share divinity with him. I don't recommend doing this because that ending sees the entire world enslaved to demons, because the demon divine slowly takes over the actual divine, which is you, and you fail. So keep in mind, you can side with Andromalique, but I would not recommend it. Feign gets a special ending where he willingly sides with the Eternals and allows them to come back into the world like they wanted throughout the entire game, because in a lot of ways, Rivellon belonged to the Eternals first. So if you have him with you, you can actually choose to do that and let the Eternals in. And that is the bulk endings of the game. So here's the thing. Despite all of those being an option, it is unlikely any of them, besides Source being purged, are actually canon. We know this because Divinity 2 exists, and a lot of the lore from Divinity Fallen Heroes marketing was released before that project got halted. So because of this, we know that more than likely what happened is that Lucian got away with it. Canonically, this is the most likely. I can't say for sure, but what most likely happened is Lucian got his way. That he managed to purge Source and restore the Veil, which purged Source from the world, and then from there, went on to become the false divine, which explains why he was so easily overtaken when Damien came back from Nemesis. And his fake assassination by Dragon Knights took place in the Dragon Knight saga. So that is the story of Divinity 2, which I also have a video series on you can check out if you're curious about what I mean. That is the most likely canonical ending because some of the marketing for Divinity Fallen Heroes actually specifically mentions it taking place in a world purged of Source. So there you go. That's the most likely. I can't verify it, but more than likely that's the ending. To wrap it up, Lucian was actually alive the entire time. He was the one sapping the gods of their strength, which was allowing the Voidwoken in after he messed up and death fogged all these elves, which caused the initial crack, which gave the Voidwoken a foothold, and it kind of snowballed out of control from there, with Lucian constantly imposing his sacrifices must be made mantra on the rest of the world. So, tell me what you guys think of the story. I want to hear all about it. Personally, I think this Divinity Original Sin 2 made Lucian out to be a bit of a nut job who tried to be very utilitarian by saying that he knows what's best for everyone, and doing god-awful things to achieve that. Let me know what you guys think down below. I'm very curious to hear from you. This is a very long video. So, with that out of the way, I hope you guys enjoyed it. As Jahan would say, may you wander in wisdom. Have an amazing day.
And so it ended. A tale that began with my own ill-fated attempt to rid the world of the Godwoken. A new divine rose, a true heir to the Seven, more powerful than ever, and united Rivellon in its battle against the Void. All across the realm he was loved, worshipped, and adored. Humans, lizards, elves, and dwarves all rallied to his banner. The Great Allegiance stood once more, but the war continued. From the depths of the Void, the God King still sought to return. As for me, my last hope of ever being freed of the God King's terrible tyranny faded when the Godwoken claimed divinity. An eternity of pain and suffering is mine. I cling now to the dream that one day the veil will be sealed, that one day I can be freed, that one day a new Godwoken will rise.
Better than new.
You look out to the endless beyond. The sun's light plays upon the waves, just as it always did. The sails flutter in the wind, just as they all... And with a start, you realize where you must go next. War raged on. Arx remained the center of power as the races united behind the Divine. But the Voidwoken attacks continued, as they did elsewhere. Arx would see many more long years of war. The ancient empire of lizards became one of the pillars of the new Divine Alliance. The houses of war and of shadows were particularly useful in the fight against the God King. The empire used the war to expand its territory. With Justinia dead, the Dwarven kingdom descended into chaos. But although they did not join the Divine Alliance, many joined the fight against the Void, and did their people great honor in battle and in death. With Lucian gone, the elves reluctantly rejoined the Divine Alliance. Their place in the war on the Void would entirely depend on the integrity of the new Divine. And on the integrity of the elven Godwoken who did not ascend. And here and there, across the world, what was left of the Black Ring fought on. The island of Fort Joy remained a sorcerer's paradise, a place of exile for those whose sorcery threatened to bring in the Void. For their well-being, its residents depended entirely on the benevolence of the new Divine. Reaper's Coast struggled on. The farms and the fisheries fought to feed the people against the Voidwoken blight. The black pits took fire. The oil there burns still. Driftwood teetered on the edge of starvation until the night the Voidwoken came from the sea. All were killed, This did, however, put an end to the famine. The nameless isle had vanished. Although only open water remained, by instinct ships would steer clear. None of the captains could articulate why. Sir Gareth thanked the surviving seekers for their service and gave them their freedom. Disillusioned with ongoing war, he set out alone to find a new purpose. He would never stop seeking. Young Han grew up a warrior and became one of the Alliance's greatest generals. But even he could not win the war. With a new divine at the helm, Malady had a powerful ally. But she was in no hurry to call in her favor. After all, it might be the last thing she ever did. Having performed the greatest act of necromancy in history, Tarquin found the new world unchallenging. He became obsessed with rumors of another plane of existence. One day he vanished and was never seen again. The undead priestess Gratiana remained in her sanctuary, happy to wait for the war to pass. She was troubled only by the silence of her goddess. Jehan the demon hunter never stopped hunting for demons. Sahala sought to strengthen the Elven alliance with the new divine. Her powers of sight proved useful in the ongoing war against the Void, but she could never be sure that the new divine trusted her. Tova, her mother, was Sahala's most trusted warrior. Sabine wandered the world. She became a household name, famed the realm over as a traveling hero, celebrated wherever she went. Enjoying life to the fullest, she was truly and finally free. On his return to the Empire, the Red Prince was hailed a hero. He married Sada, and they had many more dragons. Soon, the prince became the Emperor. Faced with dragons, the Void did not gain the upper hand in the Empire. Lohse returned to her music and enjoyed a storied career as the Divine's premier musician. Dark moods would still overtake her, and she would spend long hours walking in the wilds. She always returned with a new song. And then there was you. For how much of this do you take credit or blame? And what kind of divine were you as the world battled on? Did you show mercy or strength? Did you sacrifice others as Lucian had done? Did you regret becoming divine? Should you have given your soul and sealed the veil? Only you know the truth. Only you know if you atone for your sins.